Hello again, friends. Welcome back to the Bible Project Podcast. And the project is to work through the entire Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, over how many years it takes. And we're in episode 251, which is part 182 in our journey through Genesis. And we've been looking at the situation about the death of Sarah and the purchase of a plot of land and the burial there, Genesis chapter 23. And I'm just closing off really this whole chapter and trying to draw some conclusions from it. Now, we noticed the last time that we gathered together that it appears that Abraham had paid what seemed on the surface a rather inflated price for the property that he was going to use as a burial ground. The process that was followed was they offered the object as a gift, but in a way that they weren't expecting the offer to be accepted, and then they asked for a price. They said they would accept a price that was modest, that was really exorbitant, and Abraham actually agreed to pay the full initial price. See, then as today in the Middle East, everyone understood that the point that they arrived where they made the initial offer of the high price for the land was the point at which the bargaining process should begin. So what's going on here is they are agreeing a price and would expect them to haggle over it, but Abraham says, I want to pay the full price and I want to weigh it now. And he weighed out the 400 shekels of silver that they initially asked for. And then in verses 17 and 18 it tells us in essence that they made a contract. This is how it describes it. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and the trees within the borders of the field were deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gates of the city. So there you are, he buys the field, the plot for the property, and the cave as well, and the trees that fall within the perimeter, and they're all deeded to him. Now the word deeded in verse 17 means that they drew up a legal contract to record this event. Today still, when we buy a property, we will often get a deed to that property. Now Mamre is where Abraham lived, so he wanted the particular piece of property that he had chosen because it was right beside the cave that he would want to be the burial place for Sarah and for his family, so to speak. So why does this text of Genesis give over so many verses to the explaining of the purchase of a piece of property, a legal process to buy somewhere that he can bury his wife? Now the answer to that is that this is no ordinary transaction that's going on here. This is a continuing act of faith by Abraham, because God had promised the land to Abraham and subsequently to his generations, Isaac and Jacob. But we haven't gotten to the point yet. We haven't reached the point in the Genesis narrative about Isaac and Jacob, but it's promised to the patriarchal line, and by burying Sarah there, and then by planning to bury the other subsequent family members, Abraham is in essence saying, I believe in the promises of God, not only in how they'll work out today, but how they will work out through my future generations. That's what's going on here in this passage of Scripture. Abraham had said earlier in the passage, I'm just a pilgrim, a visitor, but God has promised me this land, and I've decided to permanently settle here, and I want to bury my wife here because I believe the promise that God made me way back in chapter 12. Now the New Testament confirms for us that that's exactly what's going on here. Hebrews chapter 11 and the first verse 8 and the first verse of part of verse 9 tell us that by faith Abraham, when called to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. You see, because Abraham believed God, he buried his wife here in the cave of the field of Machpelah in the land that would later on become known as Israel. And I'm told that if you go to Israel today, you can still discover and visit the cave of Machpelah. It's still there. And another point worth making is as we continue to read through the Bible, we'll discover not only is Sarah buried there, that Abraham is buried there, Rebecca is buried there, Leah is buried there, and Joseph will be buried there. So as I said, this is what's going on here. So just to recap what I said right at the beginning when we started to look at this 23rd chapter, I said that there are three things going on when Sarah, Abraham's wife, died. The first thing he told us is that he wept and he mourned. The second thing he was seen to do was purchase a piece of property. And then the third thing he does now is bury his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah. Alright, we're done. The funeral's over. Sarah died and he has now mourned and buried her. And that's normally where you would say, or where you would expect the story in chapter 23 to end. But it's not the end of the story. Look with me at these last two verses, verses 19 and 20, which tells us this. Afterwards, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site. So the important thing here is the field and the cave are deeded to Abraham. That's the final line of the whole story. So the story is ultimately not really about the death of Sarah as such. Its conclusions, its high point, its culmination is about the deed of land being given to Abraham. The point of the story has to do with the fact that that God promised Abraham the land of Palestine, as it was called at that point, to Abraham, and that Abraham believed that. He believed God when he said that. This is the spiritual point of the story. Granted, he buried Sarah there, but the point is not he buried her. That's not the last line. The last line, verse 20, so to speak, is when he gets the deeds of the property. For the first time, Abraham now legally owns a piece of property in the land. Interesting stuff. It's very important to notice that the last thing that is said here in this chapter is that he gets the deeds to the land. Now, if you want to destroy a good joke, give the punchline away before you get to the end of the joke. And that sort of principle is also true on a great many of these Old Testament Bible stories. If I had time, I would demonstrate that over and over again in the Bible, the point of the story is contained at the end of the story, and if you don't go all the way through to the end, you won't get the main point the author was trying to make. So you've got all the way through chapter 23 with me these last few days, and we've reached verse 20, and you arrive at the point where it says Abraham gets the deed to the plot of the land. This is all been about Abraham believing God's promises and God's delivering on that promise. Well, that's it for today, but tomorrow we'll visit this chapter one last time, and I'll try and summarize the whole chapter for you and make some suggestions of what I believe we can learn from it and how we can apply what we've learned in our lives. But that's it for now. Don't forget, if you'd like a transcript of any of these podcasts, including this one, there's always one available in the episode notes on any audio version of the podcast that you might be listening to. If you're watching it as a video format, then just click through to an audio version and you'll find a transcript in the episode notes there. But that's it for today. See you back here tomorrow or the next day, whatever that is for you. I trust. God bless you. Bye for now.